Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Thursday, everybody. We begin with economic updates. Yesterday saw the publication of the official PMI. According to these official numbers, China's manufacturing activity fell for a third consecutive month in July, increasing pressure on policymakers to speed up stimulus measures. The Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index came in at 49.4, down from 49.5 in June. Regular viewers know that China's economy is suffering from weak demand consumption as a prolonged property slowdown and tighter government control over business undermine confidence. Gabriel Ng, assistant economist with Capital Economics, observed in a note, quote, "The PMIs for July suggest that China's economy weakened further this month. The government now seems intent on ramping up policy support, which should underpin a recovery in activity in the coming months." End quote. China's Politburo this week called for faster implementation of a stimulus program, and the central bank has cut interest rates. At the recent third plenum, we remember that Beijing emphasized high-end manufacturing and an upgraded industrial sector over property and household consumption. ING economist Lin Song, in a note today, expressed, quote, "A slowdown of manufacturing could increase the urgency to bolster growth in other areas of the economy. The softening of PMI data over the past 3 months, combined with incoming tariffs on EVs and other products, adds to the likelihood that industrial activity may be moderate in the coming months. With consumption likely to remain soft amid still downbeat confidence, we may need to see an acceleration of state-led investment in the second half of the year to progress toward the 5% GDP growth target for the full year." End quote. In a Wednesday report, Nomura economists noted that the 3 consecutive months of contraction in the official PMI point to a further economic slowdown too in the second half, as the property sector slump continues to pose a drag, which we will touch on in a moment. We note first that the non-official Caixin Purchasing Managers Index for manufacturing shrank slightly in July as demand declined for the first time in 12 months, coming in at 49.8 in July, down from 51.8 the previous month. Wang Zhe, a senior economist at Caixin Insight Group who put the index together, said the lower than expected 4.7% growth rate in Q2 would make it challenging to hit the government's annual target of around 5%. Adding, quote, "The most prominent issue are still insufficient effective domestic demand and weak market optimism," end quote. Meanwhile, like we just mentioned, the housing sector continues to bleed. According to preliminary data from China Real Estate Information Corp published today, the value of new home sales from the biggest 100 real estate companies slumped 19.7% from a year earlier to 279.07 billion yuan, $38.6 billion US, faster than the 17% decline in June. Transactions dropped 36.4% in June after showing a notable increase in April and May. This is despite a series of supportive measures rolled out over the last several months. In a note published today about the numbers, Bloomberg Economics argues that the accelerating slide underscores how China's recent rescue package is falling short of expectations. The analysts estimate that the central bank's $42 billion of relending program can only help local governments purchase 0.8% of China's 60 million unsold homes. Quote, "Buyer sentiment has also been hurt since a twice-a-decade meeting of the ruling Communist Party failed to roll out more forceful support." End quote. Here referring to the recent third plenum. The real estate sector continues to drag on China's economic growth. UK-based The Financial Times points out that S&P Global Ratings expects residential sales to drop 15% this year, more than the 5% decline it projected earlier. Fitch Ratings cut its annual sales estimate to a decrease of 15 to 20%, worse than an earlier estimate of 5 to 10%. And finally, for the economy, according to a China Gold Association report published on Sunday, limited access to alternative investment channels and hedging tools such as Bitcoin and concerns over China's economic prospects led to purchases of gold bars and coins to surge by 46% in the first half of this year. Purchases increased to 213.6 metric tons, 7.5 million ounces, representing 40% of the national gold consumption in the first half of the year. The report said that Chinese consumers saw increased buying of gold bars and coins, with a reduction in spending on jewelry. Over half of the gold consumption in the first half of this year was in jewelry, yet the segment saw a 26.68% decline year-on-year to 270 million tons. Gary Ng, senior economist with Natiex Corporate and Investment Banking, expressed in a note to clients on Monday that poor consumer sentiment may negatively affect gold jewelry sales, which generally have a higher price premium. Quote, "However, the demand for gold bars will stay resilient for investment purposes." End quote. He pointed out that Chinese households now have reduced purchasing power amid low domestic demand, adding, quote, "There are very limited choices in asset preservation due to capital control and the lack of investment options." End quote. As Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post reports this week, since the start of the year, the price of gold has continued to reach record highs, driven by geopolitical uncertainties among investors, market expectations of an imminent interest rate cut by the US Federal Reserve, and soaring purchases by Chinese residents using gold as a hedge. Okay, these are the economic updates. Next up, we move to the US-China technology war, which continues to wage on. But just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, don't forget to hit the like button. Sharing and subscribing is also a big help. The channel is just about to hit 74,000 subscribers. It would be amazing if we could reach that this week. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. Thank you so much, everyone. Let's move on. Next up, both UK-based Reuters and US-based Bloomberg are reporting that Washington is drafting new rules to restrict exports of semiconductor manufacturing equipment from some foreign companies to Chinese chip makers, but that the US will exclude Dutch, Japanese, and South Korean exports from the rule. This is a muted escalation in the ongoing cat-and-mouse game around advanced chips, an escalation in that it will apply to other countries, but muted in that key exporters, like the Dutch and Japanese, not being included. Such a move will enrage Beijing and hurt US firms to some extent. With carve-outs for the Netherlands, Japan, and South Korea, the question is the cost-to-benefit ratio worth it? The restrictions aim at keeping vital technology out of the hands of Chinese manufacturers, including limits on sales of chip-making equipment. This rule would deliver a new set of constraints against memory chips for artificial intelligence, the latest arena of US-China competition. If enacted, the measure would capture HBM2 and more advanced chips, including HBM3 and HBM3E, the most cutting-edge AI memory chips being produced right now, as well as tools required to make them. HBM chips are required to run AI accelerators like those offered by NVIDIA Corp and Advanced Micro Devices Inc. The rule, an expansion of what is known as the Foreign Direct Product Rule, FDP, would bar about half a dozen Chinese fabs at the center of China's most sophisticated chip-making efforts from receiving exports from many countries. Another part of this latest export control package will lower the amount of US content that determines when foreign items are subject to US control, closing a loophole in the Foreign Direct Product Rule. Equipment, for example, could be designated as falling under export controls simply because a chip containing US technology is incorporated into it. UK-based Reuters writes that the US also plans to add about 120 entities to its restricted trade list, which will include a half-dozen chip-making factories known as fabs, plus tool makers, providers of EDA, electronic design automation software, and related companies. Quote, "The planned new rule is only in draft form and could change, but the aim is to publish it in some form this month." End quote. Amir Anwar Zadeh at Asymmetric Advisors told clients this week in a note, quote, "The only reason we can think of why the US would exclude SPEs made in the Netherlands, Japan, and Korea is that those countries will likely conform to its demands for stricter export policies to China without the US needing to resort to invoking the Foreign Direct Product Rule. The market may be mistaken to bid these stocks higher with the view that companies domiciled in these countries are free to export chip-making tools that US once restricted to China." End quote. Some push back on this explanation, however, with veteran China analyst Bill Bishop writing today, quote, "I disagree. I hear that Japan and the Netherlands basically told the Biden administration to go pound because they are afraid of the damage to their companies from reduced sales and possible PRC retaliation, and so the Biden administration backed off on forcing them to comply." End quote. Indeed, a few weeks ago, when there were rumors of possible new trip restrictions in the works, Bishop also wrote, quote, "Netherlands, ASML, and several Japanese firms stand to lose lots of revenue from tightening restrictions, and I am hearing as well that the Japanese government has been resisting more restrictions in part because of concerns that the PRC response could target rare earths, critical materials, and graphite exports that Japanese car makers rely on." End quote. Then, in a piece yesterday, he made a similar point. Quote, "Toyota is the car maker most worried, and given its political and economic importance, the Japanese government is going to protect it. And ASML has The Hague wired, so it never seemed likely that the Biden administration could get the Dutch government to move willingly on tougher controls. These half measures will cause some pain in the PRC, but have lots of loopholes without Japanese, Dutch, and South Korean participation." End quote. Of course, Beijing is not happy about this, with PRC Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian expressing to reporters today, quote, "China made clear its position multiple times on the US's malicious attempts to block and suppress China's semiconductor industry. The US continues to politicize trade and tech issues, tie them to national security, and uses them as a weapon to tighten control over chip export to China and coerce other countries to go after China's semiconductor industry, which severely undermines international trade rules, destabilizes global industry and supply chains, and serves no one's interests. China firmly opposes it. Let me stress that containing and going after China will not stop China's development, but will only make China even more determined and capable in boosting our own strength in technology and innovation." End quote. Huawei Technologies is now offering its Ascend AI chips as an alternative to products from NVIDIA and AMD, just as Beijing seeks to bolster self-sufficiency in critical technologies in response to tighter US restrictions. We also covered the idea of self-sufficiency as part of the so-called China Fortress economy in yesterday's video. However, it is unclear who supplies Huawei with the HBMs that are bundled with its Ascend chips. And tomorrow we will be discussing how Huawei has been lifted up by Beijing to be a national champion in China's ongoing technology struggle with the US. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.